seek first to understand, then be understood.
Wealth is no longer just about numbers. It's about people, relationships, and the systems that hold everything together or allow it to fall apart.
I'm going to call it a universal nightmare of the families that I work with, where there's a real fear of losing everything, of losing their wealth.
How much of that risk comes from within the family, from a bad psychology or any of those unmarket-linked areas? Michael, welcome to Inception to Infinity. Hello and welcome to Inception to Infinity. I'm your host, Anupam Satyasheel. There is a version of success that the world hands you, and then there is the version that you have to find yourself. The one that starts not with a plan, but with a signal, a quiet, persistent signal, cutting through the noise of everything you are supposed to seek. I have pursued both the versions for my part, and what I have learned is that the second one is the only one worth talking about. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us a person who knows about a topic which is dear to everybody: wealth. There is a common belief that building wealth is the hard part. Once you have created success, everything else becomes easier, more stable, more secure, more predictable. But the reality is a bit more complex. Wealth doesn't just create opportunity, it also creates pressure, expectations, and in many cases, it has unintentional consequences that unfold over time. And the real challenge isn't just generating wealth, the real challenge is preserving it, transferring it, and ensuring it doesn't quietly unravel across generations. Today's guest operates in one of the most private and least understood spaces within that world. Today, we are joined by Michael Ward, Managing Director at Forward Private Wealth Services, where he advises ultra high net worth individuals, business owners, and family offices. His area of expertise includes taxation, financial strategy, and multi-generational wealth planning. With more than 3 decades of experience, ranging from Arthur Andersen, Wells Fargo, to leadership roles in private banking and national advisory firms, Michael has worked closely with families navigating not just financial decisions, but questions of legacy, responsibility, and continuity. Wealth is no longer just about numbers. It's about people, relationships, and the systems that hold everything together or allow it to fall apart. Hence, this conversation is not just about money and wealth, it's about what happens after it's done. Michael, welcome to Inception to Infinity.
Thank you, Anupam.
So, Michael, I have known you as one of the most calm, collected, composed people. I don't think I've ever seen you rush across the corridor. You're always in control of things. I guess that's the part of the aura you have to develop to succeed in your world.
Possibly. I mean, I think, as you get older, you tend to take things a little bit slower. And you know that the first impression is not always the real impression, I guess I should say. I feel like I think in any environment, my first job is to listen and to understand, right? I didn't come up with that, but it makes a lot of sense. Seek first to understand, then be understood, right? From the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's get into the fun discussion, something which you are a master at. So I don't know if it's right or wrong, but there's a widely cited concept or idea that wealth rarely survives beyond 2 or 3 generations. I personally know many families where the 3rd or 4th generation blew up everything. And this is despite these people having access to advisors and resources. From what you have seen, is that real?
Yeah, there's this idea, this proverb out there that's sometimes called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations. Supposedly, it's universal all across the world. Um, there's been, I think, a few groups that have studied it and put some statistics behind it. Um, and is it real? Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's something that's widely discussed, in the wealth management and the tax and advisory industry, and I think it does tap into something that I actually had a discussion with my coach a week or so ago about this. There is this sort of universal, I'm going to call it a universal nightmare of the families that I work with, where there's a real fear of losing everything, of losing their wealth, and so the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations is basically just the first generation creates and builds the wealth, the second generation preserves the wealth, and the third generation, maybe because they're disconnected to the work and the grit that created the wealth, they lose the wealth. And that's what it is in a nutshell. And I think that there is some partial truth to that. That is a recurring pattern that exists with wealthy families. But on the other hand, I spend a lot of time thinking about ways to prevent that from happening. And ultimately, I think it's possible. And it's probably less about structure, less about tax planning and having the perfect trust or vehicles to transfer wealth, and maybe more about preparing the next generation to assume the I'm going to call it the responsibility of the wealth, although I'm not sure that's the perfect way to characterize it. Um, but there's something more that has to be added to the planning process that's not frequently addressed by wealth management or tax and legal advisory firms.
And Michael, to be sharing my context, my experiences, not that these third or fourth generation people are trying to squander the money or being
Right.
irresponsible.
Yeah.
Several times I've seen them trying to do things like starting a new business or relocate to another area or just go off the proven path.
Yeah.
That itself is enough sometimes to destroy a lot of wealth.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about those sacred, secret, fun places of wealthy people's corridors. So you work with people who are multimillionaires, maybe even a couple hundred million, maybe billionaires. What is something in your experience that is widely misunderstood about these wealthy families?
I mean, wealth creates a lot of opportunities. It creates access. Um, and to some degree, maybe creates some types of freedom. But it also amplifies other things as well. And, a lot of those things are sometimes negative. And, I think there's a misconception that, once you're wealthy, things are easier, everything is easier. And I don't think that's completely true. I think that it just simply amplifies what's already there. So if you're already a warm, generous, loving person, being extremely wealthy will amplify that. If you're, um, maybe more selfish or um, I don't know what the right way to put it is, but less
Very mean
agreeable,
for some
less agreeable.
people. Yeah.
Being wealthier is just going to amplify that to some degree. I mean, you see these situations where there's a lot of conflict, and it was probably there before the wealth was created as well. Except the wealth just amplifies it. So I can't say that there's one thing or a couple of things that, make wealthy families different than other people, because I don't think that's necessarily the case. So, I do think though that wealth does amplify whomever, uh, whomever has it. It amplifies who they are, right? And that's probably not as widely spoken about.
In my experience is that these people do not want to talk about money. Is that something which you can confirm for my own curiosity?
Well,
Of course, they'll talk money to you, but not to other people. They'll talk about everything else but money.
yeah, I mean, I'd say it depends. I mean, I think there is some of that. I do experience that from time to time. One of the things I do with my clients, is I really try to understand what they did to create the wealth. And people love talking about their story, about, their trials and tribulations. And it's fascinating for me because I learn a lot. That's actually, I think, why I really enjoy what I do the most is I learn so much from some of these individuals and some of these families about, what they had to go through. Um, and I think that talking about money in some circles is not considered polite. And so I do sometimes see, I always encourage my clients to talk about their planning, for example. We set up these elaborate trust structures for wealth transfer and estate planning purposes. And I always recommend to my clients that we talk to your kids before we implement anything, and let's share it with them, and let's go through it and make sure they understand it and the purpose. And I'd say half my clients, and this is not a universal rule, but they hesitate. Um, and where that comes from, I'm not sure. I'm sure it's probably the impulses not to talk about your money, right? And sometimes my clients believe that, maybe their kids don't understand how wealthy the family is. And in some situations, that is true. They just don't have a clue. Really depends where they grow up. And I think that it depends. I mean, it is out there, but talking about your wealth with your kids, especially, I'd say is a big should be a big priority because I've encountered some situations where heirs have not really truly grasped the level of wealth that their parents have created, and now they're responsible for managing it, and there can be a lot of emotional baggage associated with that, depending on the circumstances. And so I always encourage those conversations, especially with your kids, whether you talk about it with your neighbors or your peers. Ultimately, that's up to you.
So you said something about understanding from people all their preferences, their philosophy, and most important, how they made their wealth.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's the most unusual way in which you have seen somebody make like truckload of money? And again, without giving names, just for the sake of one of
Yeah.
those hard to believe ways to make money.
I'm not sure I've seen anything that's too exciting or out there. I mean, certainly some of the families I've worked for over the years, and not current clients, there's always rumors about how they created their wealth. Whether it was through illicit, illegal activity that was ultimately transformed into something that was more socially acceptable. I know that exists out there, but I've never been personally told that somebody has created money illicitly or illegally or anything like that. But I have worked with families that come from overseas, where the norms and the customs are different, and so you could only imagine. What may have happened on that journey, and so not to say that there was anything illegal, but anyway, yeah, it's I don't have anything exciting for you there, Anupam.
Moving on to the main topic of what we have been getting the most insights from you. Um, when people think about risk to losing their wealth,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's people themselves or outsiders, we almost always think about markets or bad investments or cycles and things like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
How much of that risk comes from within the family, from a bad psychology or any of those unmarket linked areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the number one reason why families lose wealth, why families, um, um, end up, um, that whole shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations. Um, the human side of, managing money and managing wealth, cannot be underestimated. And it's interesting because early in my career, a lot of trust planning, estate planning, wealth transfer planning, it really made efforts to, um, um, make it really hard for the next generation to lose the wealth. And there was a lot of restrictions put in place, and ultimately that led to a lot of unhappy beneficiaries or the next generation. And so what we've seen more recently, and when I say more recently, 10 years plus, um, is a lot more flexibility with, wealth transfer planning, with structures, trust planning. And there's still a lot of practitioners out there, that sort of do what I call old school planning and don't really take into account beneficiary happiness or how are people going to react to this or that. And they're coming from what I call lower level of consciousness, but you still see a fair amount of that out there. But by and large, I think, there's a lot more flexibility built into planning. But the risk of that is, you could still lose substantial fortunes, even with some safeguards and protections put into place. And so the human element really can't be underestimated. And I could go through that a lot. I mean, I've got, I don't even know if now's the right time to talk about this, but you sometimes have parents who've maybe spent a lot of time away from the family, creating their business or creating their wealth. And I think that can sometimes create parents that maybe indulge their children, a little bit more than they might otherwise had the circumstances been different. And I've seen, you know, tens of millions of dollars lost because, son has an interesting, exciting business opportunity, and the parents decide to fund the business opportunity. And instead of putting in, sort of structures and milestones and benchmarks in place that would help measure whether the business is truly successful, they just continue to fund the business. And years pass by and tens of millions of dollars have been lost, and nobody understands what really happened or why it happened. And mom or dad have to cut off the funding because they don't want to lose any more money. And now, there's a very charged, sort of emotionally negative dynamic going on between the children or the child and the parents. And that can have long lasting negative ramifications on a family and the family dynamic. So, that the human element, I think, is the number one reason. It's the emotional side. It's, family conflict, and things can start in childhood that rear their ugly head much later in life. Sibling rivalries, slights that occurred at some point, and now there's an ability to actually, get back at somebody for something that occurred decades ago, because there's money involved. That stuff is real, and a lot of family wealth is lost because that kind of dynamic is not addressed.
I have young children, 10 and 12. Um, how do we prepare our children to be ready to inherit wealth? And what's, like you talked about, parents who don't have time for their children, they're compensating for that by giving money
Yeah.
to find time with them, talk to them about money. But how do you help them inculcate a psychology of wealth where they can actually receive it and keep it and not do strange things like the example you talked about?
Yeah, I mean it's a slow developmental process, in my opinion. Um, and what we see in a lot of the industry is simply what I'd call education. And there's nothing wrong with education. You need that. That probably should be the starting point. But it's just sort of educating the next generation about maybe structures that have been put in place for their benefit to save on estate taxes or transfer wealth, charitable planning, um, and sometimes around investing, how to invest, although that's, it frequently um, ends up devolving into a conversation about asset allocation, which is important. There's asset allocation is important, but it, you know, it that's step one, and that's actually usually where getting an heir, prepared for assuming wealth stops, in my opinion. If that even happens, by the way, because sometimes it doesn't even happen. And I kind of uh, sometimes we set up these elaborate wealth transfer planning, these trust structures that have the ability, the potential to save tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars of taxes over time, and not income taxes. You generally, I'm talking about estate taxes, the death tax, and but it's like um, you know, a Lamborghini in some ways. It's, highly sensitive, very powerful, and can do great things and go fast. And, but you hand that Lamborghini, the keys to that Lamborghini to somebody who's not prepared to drive it. And, you end up in a crash. I mean, and so really what needs to happen is, the next step needs to be really talking about, well, what's the purpose of this wealth, and even beyond that is what's your ultimate purpose, as a person, as an individual. And there are some advisors out there that talk about investing in human capital, and that should certainly be done. Often that just ends up in the form of more education, which is fine. But I think going even deeper, and this is something that I don't think our industry does address as well. In fact, in some cases, it's just flat out avoided because, if you just think about who your typical advisor is to a wealthy family, it's an accountant and a lawyer, maybe a salesperson who calls himself an investment advisor, and those are not the people that typically you would expect to help somebody find their ultimate purpose in life. But I think if you really want to prepare somebody for stewardship of wealth over a longer period of time, you have to go there. You have to figure out a way to go there. And I always just recommend start slowly. You could do little things. I mean, it could be as simple as, giving somebody a gift of $25,000, which is a lot of money. I've had clients give $100,000 or sometimes more, and just see what the kids do with it. Do they invest it? Do they spend it? Do they consume it? Do they just let it sit in the banking account and earn no interest? Those are things that can help inform parents about maybe where they're developmentally, where the kids need to go next. So it's not, there's never a time where I'd say somebody's, ready to assume a substantial fortune. But, if you do certain things, I think developmentally, a lot of it's emotional, it's philosophical, it's psychological. It's not necessarily giving more education about how a trust works or, the perfect asset allocation.
Now, when these things are being planned, and you talked a lot about perfect communication between parents and children, and all that being done in the right way. In your experience, whether it's lack of communication or over communication or unaligned expectations, Are there some bad examples where this becomes really complicated between the recipient and the giver, and then it leads to a whole different kind of problems?
For sure. I mean, there's many examples of kids suing their parents, especially in situations where maybe it's third generation, and the second generation was given responsibility for the family fortune, and for whatever reason, that ends up getting consumed or lost somehow, and then you see kids suing their parents. It's a scenario that I've never seen up close and personal, but it does happen. It's out there in the press. You can read the headlines. I think that's frequently, I think that's obviously, that severed relationship. It usually doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that's been there for a long period of time. And, yeah, there's plenty of bad examples out there. My job is to make sure that it doesn't involve any of my clients. And so, but there are examples out there, and I frequently talk about them. And I there are some horror stories. They're not my stories that I've heard, but they're real. They're people that have been told to me by people who are credible and that wouldn't make stuff up like this. But sometimes you give that child that $100,000, and you get a up close sort of experience of who they really are, because now they have a little bit of money. And I'm not going to go into any details, but it could end poorly. Let's just say that. And parents have changed their estate plans. I've had situations where, this is another reason why I encourage family meetings. Is sometimes parents think one child should take the lead for responsibility for everything, including their siblings' trusts, because maybe they're an attorney, or they were more successful in their career. And I've had situations where we've gone through family meetings and explain, what the parents are contemplating in terms of trusts, and transferring wealth, and how it's all going to work. And then they realized afterwards, the parents realized that, the kids were the one kid that they appointed to be in charge of everything got extremely aggressive behind the scenes with their siblings, because the power dynamic maybe had shifted psychologically. And that was great, because they realized they couldn't go forward with their plans. So
So, coming closer to what you usually deal with, at what, and I'm not trying to get any exact data from you, but at what level of wealth does it make sense for someone to engage someone like you? Um, at what, like, inflation is real, but at current level of numbers, and even if they can't afford someone like you, or they can't engage with someone like you, how should they think about structuring and protecting wealth? Not like the people who are making minimum income, but the people who actually have like a couple $1 million or maybe tens of millions of dollars. I see both the cases. The people who have just like maybe 1 or 2 million and they're overly worried about structuring it. And I've seen people who are like 50, 60 and they have done nothing about structuring. So is there a
yeah,
right size at which they should start paying attention, or is it just depends?
I mean, it really depends on what type of structure you're talking about at the end of the day. So, but
Protection and the
uh,
risk management and things like that.
yeah, I mean, once you get a taxable estate, which is over $30 million right now, you should definitely start more seriously looking at your overall, um, sort of estate planning. And I mean, people start before that as well, but maybe thinking about some wealth transfer planning. um, and I'd say income tax planning, especially if you're a business owner, should start early. It should be an integral part of just your normal operating procedure. In my opinion, a lot of accountants are not very good at proactive planning. They're more reactive. And so looking for people that are advisors that are more proactive, You get a lot of free planning from financial institutions, but I always say you get what you pay for. And if somebody can't stand behind their advice, a lot of times you're going to see disclaimers saying we don't provide trust or legal services from financial institutions. So that's them basically saying you can't trust anything I told you, in my opinion. Okay, professionally speaking. And there's some very good people at those financial institutions. I'm not trying to sort of discount the what they offer. But at the end of the day, accountability does matter. And I just think that one of the big differences, I guess, between um, a lot of wealthy families and others is that they realize there is a eroding influence of tax in sort of accumulation of wealth, and it's not something that I think there's this misconception out there that wealthy clients don't pay their or wealthy people don't pay their fair share of taxes. That hasn't been my experience. My clients pay a lot of taxes, but where they can legally plan and to avoid taxes, they do, and they frequently take advantage of all those opportunities. Whether or not you need to do wealth transfer planning when you have $2 million of wealth, that I'll leave that up to you and your advisor. But I think generally I'd say probably nowadays $30 million of wealth, you should start looking at things more seriously. Early in my career, the first 10 years, I almost all of my clients universally were family offices, and including several, Forbes 400 family offices, or billionaire families. And at a certain point in my career, I decided I wasn't going to go after those clients anymore. I have a few as clients right now, but by and large, I'd say they're overplanned, and they've heard everything under the sun, and because everybody's trying to pitch them and market to them. And so I really focus on a space, sort of a niche, that is below what I'd call the brick and mortar family office level. It's anywhere from 40 or $50 million of net worth up to $500 million. And the reason I focus in that space is because it's surprising how poorly planned a lot of those families are. And maybe before 2007, 2008, those families would have had single family offices, some of them, but it just became too expensive. The cost benefit of having a single brick and mortar family office was too high, and everybody realized it, or a lot of people realized it. And so that's where Forward PWS is really a virtual family office where we provide the same level of service that you'd get from a single family office, without the high cost of a large accounting firm. So that's ultimately our aim.
I'm sure that information will be very useful to some of people in our audience. Um, Going back to the psychology of wealth,
Mhm,
we hear from many wealthy people that money and wealth have to have a purpose bigger than just accumulation and
mhm.
lifestyle and all those things. What is your view on that? And is there like some preferred cause that you see wealthy people pursue more often than not? I know you personally are involved with multiple charities and
Mhm.
being such a responsible citizen, but and I know that you participate in feeding hungry people in Africa and worldwide and all those great things. But in your client base or in your experience, is there a certain theme that these people support more, like climate or education, or is it all widely distributed?
I'd say it's pretty widely um, distributed. I think what ends up happening is people develop causes over their lifetime that are meaningful to them. And that's where a lot of their charitable resources get um, um, directed towards. And I can't say that there's one, other than universities, right? I think a lot of people direct a lot of resources towards universities and education, and because that's sort of a legacy building avenue in some ways, to have your name on a building at UCLA, or any big university. I think that the thing that I'm seeing actually, which is I think positive, is this is really being led, I think, by the next generation. I know my own kids have, they've surprised me that they're really looking at doing charitable giving, or altruism, and doing it more effectively, and better. Like, well, ultimately, what is the purpose of this altruism, right? And there's a whole movement around that, but charity can be very inefficient. I've worked with a lot of very inefficient charities over the years, and I try not to contribute my money towards them, but I've seen a fair number, and maybe, well, um, yeah, they're just not always directing the resources that they've been entrusted with most efficiently. Okay. And so I think this is a positive thing, I think, that we're seeing from this next generation, of trying to allocate those resources to doing more good in the world, to saving more lives, to making more of an impact. And I see that as a really positive step. And my hope is that we can direct more, like, of those resources in that direction, to do more good out in the world. Because I think ultimately, a lot of the families that I work with, um, they really want to be a force for good in their community. And some people define community different than others. But whatever that definition of community is, they do want to make a difference and make an impact, and they have the ability to do that. So I think this is all very positive.
Michael, I know that you have several charitable commitments. I was particularly curious about Simplicity Hero Foundation. I mean, that's not a very common name. What does the charity do? It was yours started this charity, didn't you?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
what does it do?
exactly. Shannon and I started that, I'd say, in December 2024, and it's an idea I had for a while, percolating, but I, finally took action, and set it all up. And really, it was inspired by a quote from Gandhi, and it's not really clear if he really said this or not, as is the case with some Gandhi quotes. But the quote was, "Live simply so that others may simply live." And that, for me personally, was a very powerful sort of idea and concept. And it got me thinking about, because I really feel strongly about community service. I've been a member of a organization called We Benefit Children for over a decade now.
Excellent.
And yeah, and one of the reasons I was attracted to the organization, because it did require a sort of a higher level of charitable giving than I had previously ever committed to. And but one of the things that attracted me to it is I knew exactly where my money was going, and also that I could get my kids involved. And I think, um, philosophically, me and my children have been, um, um, we have a good lifestyle. And part of the sort of responsibility um, of having that good lifestyle, in my opinion, is helping others, who may need some assistance. And so I got them involved very early. I mean, and we used to do, we've done a lot of Thanksgiving, food basket giveaways, and library refurbishments, and taking kids from different parts of Los Angeles County that may not get to go to the beach that frequently, believe it or not, or maybe have never been to the Griffith Observatory, or the zoo. I mean, and sort of give them those experiences, and help them see other things out there, other experiences, enriching experiences. And so, but it just occurred to me, it doesn't matter your circumstances, that if we just lived a little bit more simply, right? You could be a hero as well. And just came to me one day, simplicity hero. You could be a simplicity hero just by living simply. And so that's really the genesis of the name and where it came from. And ultimately, it's going to benefit children in different forms and fashion. And we've done that through a variety of, we give gifts to Lego gifts. I feel very strongly about giving Lego to foster kids during the holidays. And ultimately it's going to lead to some scholarships and some other programs, but that's really the genesis of the name.
Michael, we have a wonderful tradition in our podcast that we ask guests to leave a question for a future guest. And that will be our opportunity to make it difficult for the next guy if you want to.
Okay.
For our part, we have got a bunch of questions. And I want
Sure.
to offer you a question different from what my team had chosen for you.
Okay. Sure.
Um, Many people say, and it's widely written in literature these days, that we are living in an increasingly divisive society, at least in Americas.
Uh-huh.
Um, what does it mean for from your lens? Like, do you think it impacts the people who have enough wealth to lobby and to get things which they want, than for a common man who is left to pick whatever is the outcome of legislation and lawmaking and whatever else might happen? So essentially, is the wealth divide impacting that whole division differently, or it's the same for everyone in your to your vantage point?
I mean, my experience with that, obviously, frequently comes through proposed tax legislation. Okay. And it's not, I'm not saying it's funny, but and so, how my clients experience that is frequently more related to sort of how they feel about tax policy, especially like in California. I'm in California, you're in California. Tax policy, and whether or not it's equitable. And what I've seen more recently in California is more of my clients, and more wealthy families considering whether or not it makes sense to stay in California, in the state of California. I have had clients move businesses. I've had clients relocate. I frequently have this conversation, not with every family, but with a lot of families. It's increasing, about whether they should relocate to somewhere else outside of California. And I think a lot of that is driven by this idea that of the wealth divide. And I can't imagine it's going to make it better, if businesses are leaving the state of California, especially really good, innovative businesses. And we're obviously talking a lot about this wealth tax in California, and it's only going to impact billionaires. But I think the fear of my non-billionaire clients is that it's going to trickle down. And I think those are the I said earlier that my clients, I've never had a client that tried to illegally avoid or evade tax. I've never experienced it. If a client brought it up, we wouldn't even. I've had clients go the other way, where they've said, I'd rather just not, be. I want to push it too far. Let's just pay the tax. Okay. And I've had that experience many times. And so I just think this whole idea that these wealthy families are not paying their fair share of taxes is not accurate. And I think that California, it's one of the, it, a lot of people feel there's a bubble right now in the markets, and they're looking for the prick, whatever's going to pop that bubble. I think, one of the it's a presentation, a financial presentation that I attended earlier this year, suggested that the California wealth tax, if it actually passes, may be the prick that pops that bubble, because you're going to see I think, a lot more individuals leaving the state, whether or not it's warranted ultimately. And that's sort of how I'm experiencing that divide. I think from a charitable perspective, I mean, there appears to be more of a need than ever, especially like during COVID, because there was so much uncertainty. And I think that's lingered to some degree. Um, you know, uh, but ultimately, um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's the best answer I can give you on that.
That's good. But now you may have a question for the next guest. Hopefully, it's more straightforward than the one you got.
Yeah, mine's very straightforward. So, I mean, I'm always interested in, understanding. Well, the question is a simple one. It's what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And it's a very straightforward question, but I think it points to maybe some deeper purpose, deeper meanings for some individuals. So just simply, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And that's I think that's it's always interesting to hear what somebody's response is to that.
Absolutely. And before we let you go, Michael, where can people find you? All the people who have $50, $100 who want to engage something like you, where can they
You
find
know, it's interesting because we have a website. I mean, we've got Forward PWS. PWS stands for Private Wealth Services. So forwardpws.com. You can always go there. But it's amazing how much spam email and phone calls I get, because a lot of my referrals, they're private referrals. I never get a referral from my website. I'd be very skeptical to get one, actually. So and just because of this level of spam and scamming that's going on out there, and I always think, I mean, LinkedIn is a great vehicle to find out who do we know in common, and then let's connect on that level. And if we have somebody in common, it's just unfortunately, I don't run the type of business where I'm looking for leads from the internet, and maybe that's fortunately, actually. But I think anytime I get a referral, I do take it very seriously, from somebody in my network, and I work with some incredible advisors, fortunately. So it's one of the benefits of having my own business, is that I've been able to really focus and narrow in on the advisors that I think are really making a difference. At a minimum, have their skin in the game. Ideally, their soul in the game, because those are the people I want to work with. Those are the people I want my clients working with. And when I make a referral to my clients, I want them to know I'm referring them to somebody that is good at what they do, and they're doing it for more than just the money. So forwardpws.com.
And I'm just curious, does that name have something to do with your last name, or you just like the word forward?
It does, yeah. And when I was thinking about what to name my business, yeah, I don't remember the exact process, but obviously, my last name is Ward, and so when I thought about my ultimate purpose and for creating a business, it was for wards, for my family. And
A beautiful use of word.
so and so our logo does sort of accentuate the W, so you can see the ward uh, in there. And that's not, believe it or not, my oldest son. He came up with the design for the for the logo, and I told him what I wanted, and and the meaning behind the name, and he created a logo that I'm still using to this day. And anyway, yeah, so it does have a meaning because the business is for wards, but I also feel very strongly about moving forward in in life. You always have to move forward, and I can't remember the exact saying, but you get knocked down, you got to get back up again, and you got to move forward. So, and so it does have that double meaning.
Michael, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that somebody from the audience will surprise you by becoming a rare referral from a podcast. Who
Okay.
knows?
Thank you. I appreciate it, Anupam.
Thank you
It
so much,
was it
Michael.
was fun. Thank you.